Hey, Brixel! The Festival of the Four Winds, new default settings, and could Guild Wars 2 win a Grammy? Welcome to Last Week in Tyria. So here we are in August, and still no concrete news on the Steam release or the 10th anniversary celebrations, but stick with us and I'll let you know as soon as any info is available. You can also follow me on Twitter at brixelyt for up-to-date Guild Wars 2 news, or just to appreciate my posts. Big shout out to our patrons, ding the thing if you haven't already, and with that, let's dive in. So, anyone logging into the game in the last week will have received a letter from Miss Exposition herself, Ellen Keel. You know her, the character Anet drags at a lion's arch whenever someone that's not Dragon's Watch is needed to explain something. Well, this time she's making contact to let us know that the Festival of the Four Winds is back. Anet don't hold back when it comes to festive and holiday events, and this is no exception. You can spend hours with this content, and trust me, I have. There is a shitload to do, plus you're gonna want to go back and redo activities because A, they're genuinely fun, and B, there's some pretty sick rewards. The Festival of the Four Winds is split up between two maps, the Labyrinthine Cliffs where you'll be fishing, skiff racing, finding hidden loot, and much more, and the more combat-focused events held in the Crown Pavilion. Queen Jenna has, of course, reopened the pavilion for this year's festivities because, you know, nothing bad ever happens at the Crown Pavilion. The pavilion is where you'll face off against progressively more challenging foes in one-on-one bouts, as well as tackle a handful of fun but fairly straightforward bosses. There are some cool cosmetic rewards to work towards, and the events themselves are pretty entertaining. I won't lie, pelting the fire effigy with water balloons gave me a good giggle. Poor bastard obviously wasn't expecting us to catch on to his one super secret weakness: water. Overall, the Festival of the Four Winds is great content, so go give it a whirl if you haven't already. Up next, new default options. Okay, I know this isn't necessarily the sexiest story, but these changes are going to have significant effects on the new player experience. Now, technically, these settings aren't new, and they've all been in the game for years, but they've been turned off by default. The more notable settings that will now be left on include AoE loot, auto loot, and show all usable object names. Look, I honestly don't know why these options were ever off by default. I mean, not having usable object names on sort of feels like playing the game with one eye tied behind my back. In fact, the only reason I could ever think of turning it off is to self-impose frustration. So yeah, it's a great change, but honestly, in some ways, I think they could have gone a little further. Now, this may be a controversial take, especially coming from someone who used the setting until very recently, but don't you think perhaps double tap to dodge should also be turned off by default? Now, hear me out, if you still use double tap to dodge, I highly recommend finding an alternative button to map it to and just trying it. I swear, once you're used to it, you won't want to go back. And speaking of mapping, I was also hoping the action cam toggle would get a little bit more of a spotlight in the options menu. The action cam is, in my opinion, one of the most overlooked and fun features in the game. Yeah, I know it won't make you a better player, but I've come to realize it has great value in the cinematic immersion department, and it's just fun. Don't get me wrong, I, like probably many of you, used to think it was a meme setting. I mean, why else would they basically bury it in the options menu catacombs other than to avoid anyone accidentally stumbling across it? My point is, when new players start playing the game, there should at least be a tutorial pop-up that mentions that action cam exists? One final thing I'd like to highlight here is that hitting A and D now makes you strafe instead of turn. F***ing finally! Anet finally caught up with the established standards of like the last decade. Seriously, keyboard tank controls need to be deleted, period. And I don't mean to be overdramatic here, but if I find out that you changed it back to default keyboard turning, I will break into your house while you sleep and change it back. I kid, obviously keyboard turning should be kept in the game as an accessibility feature, but it clearly shouldn't be the default movement setting. Next up, could Guild Wars 2 be getting a Grammy? Maybe. Well, Guild Wars 2 composer McLean Dimer, I'm sorry if I butchered your name.
My name is McLean Dimer.
Posted on Twitter last week, Speaking of Guild Wars 2, I just submitted the End of Dragon soundtrack for the Grammys. They finally added a category for video game scores, and I'm determined to be in that first class of nominees. Summon all your positive thoughts, Commanders. This was followed by a screenshot of their submission to the Recording Academy. I think we can all agree that the Guild Wars series has consistently had absolute banger after absolute banger, and this high pedigree of music has stayed consistently excellent due in large part to Dimer. The submission to the Recording Academy comes on the heels of the announcement of 5 new categories to the Grammys in 2023, including Songwriter of the Year, non-classical, Best Alternative Music Performance, Best Americana Performance, Best Spoken Word Poetry Album, and of course, Best Score Soundtrack for Video Games and Other Interactive Media. A statement from the Academy clarifies that the new video game category recognizes excellence in score soundtrack albums comprised predominantly of original scores and created specifically for or as a companion to a current video game or interactive media released within the qualification period. So, could Guild Wars 2 be getting a Grammy? Well, I'm biased, obviously, and I think the End of Dragon soundtrack absolutely slaps, so if I was the voting committee, I mean, obviously it would win. But no, I'm obviously not the Recording Academy voting committee. It's like Jay-Z and Beyonce have just straight up been ignoring my persuasive ongoing years-long email campaign. Cause, as we all know, Jay-Z and Beyonce make all final decisions in the music industry. That's just how monarchies work. Wrapping up this week's episode, we're going to take a look at a comment left by Shadow in the Void on our most recent video regarding a potential Guild Wars 3 or Guild Wars 1 remaster. They say, Guild Wars 1 engine upgrade would be nice, but starting to release new Guild Wars 1 expansions again would be even nicer. Give me a new area in Tyria to explore, with a new story in the age of Guild Wars 1, and then give me a Guild Wars 2 expansion in the same region a few years later. I'm sure it would sell copies of both games. Honestly, I agree. I'd love to see a modern Guild Wars 1 expansion. In fact, I'd lose my freaking mind over one. It would be so cool to see what ANEC could do with the more co-op RPG focus of Guild Wars 1 now in 2022. And as you suggested, how awesome would it be to go back to more zones from Guild Wars 1 content in Guild Wars 2? The recreation of Old Kaineng in End of Dragons is so cool. So I'd love to see the design team take on something like that again. But that's it. What do you think of this or any of the topics we covered this week? You think Guild Wars has a shot of that Grammy dub? What do you think of the new default settings? And have you been playing Festival of the Four Winds? Leave your comments down below the like button and I could be responding to you in a future episode of Last Week in Tyria. A huge shout out to our patrons and supporters and a special shout out to our Guardian tier patrons, Liam Pullis, Anthony Hodgson, Phil DeVette, and Brain Not Bright. Thank you so much for watching. Brixel loves you very much, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.